Hi, I'm Vishal Kishore, and I'm the Director of the Health Transformation Lab and Professor of Innovation and Public Policy at RMIT. Now, here at the lab, we aim to provocatively and rebelliously transform healthcare, playing with breakthrough technology, innovative and wacky ideas, and the most inspired and interesting people. My own interests lie in healthcare cybernetics, political economy, and the ethics and public policy of healthcare systems. But if you think that's interesting, just wait until you meet the rest of the team.
My name's Matu Bush. I'm the Deputy Director of the Health Transformation Lab. I'm both a clinician and a designer, and I've worked in healthcare for over 27 years here in Australia and internationally.
I'm Juan Sanin. I'm lecturer in the School of Design and fellow in the Health Transformation Lab. I work creating living labs for social innovation in healthcare organizations.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Flegner and I'm an Innovation Fellow at the Health Transformation Lab. I bring my background as an architect and also in design anthropology to the lab's strategic design and innovation work.
Hi, my name's Jess Chatterton and I'm an Impact Fellow here at the lab. My background is in biomedical research as an immunologist at the Doherty Institute. My interests are sustainability, systems thinking, and science communication.
Hi, my name is Nicolas. I'm a development economist originally from Argentina. I work as an Impact Fellow researching issues in the intersection of economics, public policy, innovation, and political philosophy.
Hi there, my name is Govind. I'm an Impact Fellow here at the lab. My background is in data science, and my interests lie in the different ways we can facilitate human flourishing and cybernetics and its feedback loops.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Open Labs Online, the second session. It's a real pleasure to have you all with us here today. And we've got a wonderful set of conversations and presentations for you today as we explore an interesting shift in our experience of the pandemic from one of emergency procedures and lockdown mechanisms to one of re-engaging as lockdown starts to ease, and also kind of reinterpreting the experience that we've all been involved in as we come to reflect upon what we've been through in a different kind of way, as we start to understand what's been happening to us in a different kind of way, and as we start to telescope our understanding of time and come to different understandings. So we've got a wonderful set of conversations. We've got a wonderful set of conversations for you today. We'll be hearing from one of our fellows in the lab, Nicolas, who has been doing some fantastic work and thinking a little bit about how we've been re-understanding, reinterpreting, and redefining the role of the individual and the collective. We will be hearing from Rachel Wells, our chief storyteller here at the Social Innovation Hub at RMIT and a key member of our Health Transformation Lab, who's recently written a piece and will be telling us a little bit about some of the conversations she's been having with a range of people who can guide us into a re-emergence and a re-engagement with society in a different kind of way, from astronauts to prisoners to a range of others. And we'll also be launching a fantastic initiative called Letter to My Pre-COVID Self, which you'll hear more about with some fantastic guests and panelists, having a conversation with our Deputy Director about how we can cause ourselves to re-understand and re-narrate to ourselves the experience that we've all been having. So we hope you enjoy. There'll be time for question and answers afterwards. But for now, let me introduce to you Nicolas and Charlotte.
Thank you, Michelle. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Charlotte and I work at the lab together with my colleague Nicolas. And we have been doing some thinking over the last 10 weeks or so, has it been, around this relationship between the individual and the health system. Now, this was really spurred by seeing all these images. I'll just share my screen. Screen here, I hope that works. We were seeing all these images such as Boris Johnson standing in front of a campaign to for people to stay at home, to protect the NHS and to save lives. So in the lab, we've been talking around how this really reflects this inversion of the usual signage and messaging that we see in the healthcare system between the traditional relationship of the patient and the healthcare system. Now there's this inversion where the healthcare system, where we as the public, as individuals and as citizens, are being asked to protect our healthcare system. That's what really started off this conversation that we were having in the lab, that Nico is going to talk a little bit more around this.
Well, hi, Charlotte, and hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. And yes, this has been something we have been discussing quite a lot here in the lab, how this is kind of a paradoxical situation now, in which we usually understand the healthcare system as something that takes care of individuals, of patients, and now this has been switched, and we're required to take care of the healthcare system so that it takes care of ourselves. So this is kind of an interesting situation, not common and really a new situation, because what we have been experiencing in the last few months is this strategy of flattening the curve that we all have been hearing about, and it's interesting to reflect about what does it really mean. So it's obviously taking care of our own health, which by taking care of our own health, we're taking care of the whole system so that it can cope with new cases of people who need to use ITUs and things like that. But there is I think a more important thing there, which is that by taking care of ourselves, we are taking care of others, which are not any kind of other people, but basically the people who are most vulnerable in our society. So we are basically in this context of COVID-19, we are taking care of all the people who are the most the range of population that have more higher fatality rates. So that's a really interesting thing, and it shifts a lot how we think about we as individuals react to the whole collective and in our society. This takes us to think a little bit and to discuss where the boundaries are between how our own behaviors react and reflect on the whole collective situation, and how the boundaries between what's collective and what's individual, it's kind of blurry and can shift a lot, and it can change our understanding of how we understand the whole healthcare system.
And so as restrictions ease at the moment, and we're told that new activities are possible and going back to some kind of sense of new normality is possible each week on week, we're still being told as individuals to proceed with caution. So from what you just talked about, are there some things that we should bear in mind as we make those decisions for ourselves? In the sense, whilst restrictions are easing, we're still having to make personal choices, not just for ourselves, but as you said, for the collective. So what are some tips that you'd to help us think through these decisions and personal and collective responsibilities?
Well, as I was saying before, I think that it's really useful to reshape how we think about health, because usually we think it from a very individual perspective, as we are healthy people and things like that. But all this situation allows us to think it in a different way. We can shift from this very personal, usually very intimate situation to a more collective endeavor. I was thinking basically on two different dimensions in which we can think this aspect. One is that to rethink this idea that it's really very commonsensical of thinking health as an individual goal, and thinking health in this way is kind of thinking of health in a kind of mechanistic view, in a mechanistic way. When we think of what health does to us, is like fixing a machine. So we are being fixed to do the things we need to do. But this is, it's kind of not enough to understand what health really comprises. So I think it's really more interesting to think health in a more complex social interaction kind of scheme. So the point of being healthy, it's not just being health, but being able to flourish in society, to be embedded in a community that gives meaningful sense to our lives. So that's one thing that I think that we need to take into account. The other one is these few last months has shown us how health issues can transform really in a very drastic way how our societies perform. So this thing that seems to be a very individual issue, such as health, has lots of implications in how our societies are transformed and can be transformed all the time. I mean, we have been experiencing restrictions, for example, in terms of freedom, in the sense that we have to stay at home just to keep all this strategy of flattening the curve I was mentioned before. But this is not the first time this kind of things have happened. We don't have time here to explore some other issues, but huge transformations have come after this kind of episodes throughout human history, and this will be a really interesting thing to dig afterwards. But for example, an interesting thing to think about this is how we were reacting when all this started around February, March. So a lot of people were really aware and tried to stay at home and try to follow the strategy of flattening the curve. But we also witnessed different kind of behaviors. For example, when all the stockpiling started and riots not riots, but conflicts in supermarkets and things like that, and lots of discrimination when the disease started to come on shore here. So this complex relation between our individual behaviors and how they impact on society are really things that we need to take care and take really into account now that we are emerging, and how the combination of our own behavior and the enforcement that we were witnessing by different government actions is really important in this state, I think.
And speaking of, so this is quite a mindset shift. And so speaking of government actions, what do you think should be retained from this time into the future? And what do you think we need to be conscious of in this mindset shift that's being asked of us?
Well, it's a difficult question in the sense that we don't really know what will happen afterwards. I mean, we can only speculate about this, but I think that's really coming back a little bit to what I said before. We have seen lots of restrictions in what we were our normal lives, and things if 6 months ago someone would have said us, you will have to stay at home and you won't be able to get out for anything, just for a few things, we wouldn't have believed that. So the risk I see now is that all this enforcement over private liberties, let's say, that has materialized in lockdowns, but also in different kind of strategies such as tracing and things like that. There's a very smooth balance between what this is required to do at this moment to keep us safe from the disease now that we are emerging, because we don't know if we will be experiencing new waves of the virus. So this balance between being safe and being restricted is really a very delicate balance. And in this sense, I guess that it will be really important to try to focus this emerging period in trust rather than suspicion. So because we have seen a lot of people doing really great work in terms of solidarity with others. For example, people doing the shopping for other people who cannot do that kind of stuff or things like that. But we have also seen lots of very more not so very nice attitudes during this stage. So I think that we have to balance this trade-off between being enforced to do stuff and being able to not that all our liberties can be overthrown in this sense. So in this sense, I think that we have to be careful in not falling into a kind of society focused on surveillance. That's something that a lot of people is talking about now. But I think that the key there is that the bonds that we create after this are more based on solidarity than this kind of suspicion, let's say.
Yeah, sure. It's a really good point. And Rachel, who works in our hub, is now going to look at this issue from a completely different angle and speak about her work together with, or introduced by Venetia, who's our engagement manager at the hub. Thanks, Nico. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Engagement at the RMIT Innovation Hub. In this segment, as Charlotte mentioned, we'll be talking to Rachel Wells. Rachel is a journalist and storyteller at the Health Transformation Lab. And over the past week, as part of an article she wrote for The Guardian, which we'll also share with you in the chat, Rachel had the opportunity to talk to a variety of people who have experienced long periods in isolation, from astronauts to adventurers, about what it might be like as we re-enter society. Rachel, can you tell us a little bit about how the article came about and exactly you interviewed?
Yes, thanks, Venetia. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Yeah, actually, the article came about out of a conversation I had with Vishal, our director who you met earlier, probably a good 6 weeks or so ago or even more, when he said, you know, people think this is the hard bit. This was kind of as we're going into lockdown. He said, in fact, the really challenging bit is perhaps going to be at the other end. And sure enough, now that we're kind of gradually getting to that point, these are the kind of conversations that people are having, that perhaps they're not ready to go back to their workplaces or their places of learning, their elements of life that they like in lockdown. So we started talking about, you know, who are the types of people that we could perhaps speak to that have been through, I don't know if there's been anything similar to this in our lifetime, but at least who have experienced extended periods of isolation. So we started thinking about, you know, people in the prison system, which perhaps not so much isolation, perhaps confinement, astronauts. And it's actually, once you start having a look at astronauts, one, there haven't been that many people that have gone into space, and there actually haven't been that many that have been in space for long periods of time. But Andy Thomas was one of those, the Australian astronaut, of course. He spent 20 weeks on the Mir space station. So we thought we'd have a chat to him. Jessica Watson was the other one that came to mind, who she spent 210 days at the age of 16 sailing around the world. I'm sure many of you remember her story. And the third person I had a chat to was Peter Hillary, who is the son of Edmund Hillary, and who himself has twice reached the summit of Mount Everest. And he did an 82 or 84-day trek across Antarctica to the South Pole with two other people. So I thought they'd be pretty good people to have a chat to. And remarkably, they all came back to me and were very forthcoming and willing to have a chat. And I think part of that is that they all acknowledged how difficult this period is, and thought that, you know, that readers and Australians could perhaps benefit from some of their insights. So that was really fantastic.
So interesting. I feel like I should have done more adventurous things in my time. For those of us, though, who are preparing to re-enter society as restrictions ease, what can we expect, and what advice did they have for us from their perspective?
I think there were 4 key themes that came out of the conversations I had with them, and they were kind of recurring themes, I guess. And one of the first ones was the fact that change is hard, and that many of us find change hard, even if it's a good change or a bad change. So, you know, going into this was hard because for a lot of us it was kind of it was an enforced change. It wasn't made by choice, so that kind of made it even more difficult. But yeah, I think the overarching thing from a lot of them was that change is hard, whether you're going into a good situation or going into a difficult situation. It is hard, and that we need to kind of give ourselves some time to adapt to that. So that was kind of the first main one. And sorry, the second one is to kind of give yourself time to adjust. And I think someone who summed that up really well was Jessica Watson, who said not only one of the things that her mentors spoke to her about before she set off on her voyage was to mentally prepare for that period of adjustment at the beginning, that those first few weeks and months would be really difficult, or first few weeks would be really difficult. But she said the same applied at the other end as well, that she also had to allow herself to readjust at the other end. She'd got used to so many kind of routines and ways of doing things. And in fact, one of the interesting things she mentioned was that when she was back on land, when she spoke to people, she no longer made eye contact with them because she had spent so much time speaking to people on, you know, the satellite phone or radio. So just those little things that she had to readapt to once she was back on land. The third point, which was really important, I think, and perhaps they even admitted but is easier said than done, was taking the lessons that you learnt about yourself while in isolation with you. So Andy Thomas was very generous with his insights on that. He said one of the great things about being on the space station was having that time for introspection. And he said one of the really valuable lessons he learnt about himself was, you know, about some of his own family relationships, and that there were things that he could do better on his behalf with some of those relationships. So he said that was a really important thing for him to learn. So he just said, you know, having that, the lessons you learn while you're in isolation. The other things I think he spoke about were things like, you know, the things we do out of perhaps obligation or to please others, or that the things we do that aren't particularly working well for us. Now that we have time to kind of step back from them, we can kind of evaluate which ones we want to keep doing when we do go back. And both he and Jessica kind of spoke about also the good habits or the positive habits that you formed while in lockdown as well, to try and bring them with you. One of Jessica's was making a point every evening of watching the sunset while she was out at sea, and she said it's something she still tries to do now, particularly if she's you know, going through a difficult time or stressed or needs some space. She'll make sure she goes down, and particularly down to the water, and take some time out there watching the sunset. So that was a good one. And then finally, I think the final point that several of them made, and which Michelle made as well, I included some of his insightful comments in the article as well, is that we have a choice in what life after lockdown might look like, or we have some choice out of what it might look like. So I guess while we have that time for introspection, is to actually continue to make choices about what things we want to bring with us, I guess, whether it's the way we work, whether it's the way our family and domestic lives are run. And yeah, so that was another important one, I think, is that we do have choice, and that we can kind of, now that we've demonstrated that we can do things differently, that we can perhaps continue this experiment after restrictions start easing.
Thanks, Rach. I was wondering, is there anything that particularly surprised you from your conversations? Anything that they said about returning to normality that was really surprising?
Yeah, I guess there are a couple of things. I guess one thing that Andy Thomas said was how quickly we can actually slip back into our old ways, even after having such a lengthy period of time doing things differently. And he said it can almost feel like a dream once you're back in your, you know, I guess they won't be so much normalised, but in our semi-normal routines, how much can almost feel like a dream of what we've been through. And he said you have to be quite disciplined about taking those lessons you've learned and those things you want to continue on with you because, yeah, those bad habits can creep back in. And I guess the final thing that he said, you know, I asked him how he felt about, I guess, the parallels that many people have been drawing between, you know, spending 20 weeks on a space station and spending, I think it's been 10 or 11 or 12 weeks now confined to our homes. And the surprising thing that he said that in many ways, this lockdown was more difficult, because he said, you know, when you're in a space station, you've got, you know, a crew of thousands making sure you're okay. They're watching your back. They're checking you've got everything you need. And I think that's a really telling point, that, and something that I think was spoken about very early on, that we do need those support networks around us when we are isolated. So there was that, and then I think the final point he just made about that as well was that down here we don't have the spectacular views that he had up there, and the fact that, you know, every 45 minutes he had the chance to see a sunrise or a sunset. But I did think that was just really interesting, that for people that have experienced, you know, quite extreme situations and adventures, they actually found that this was a really, you know, comparable and even in some circumstances and in some ways more challenging situation. And I guess the point on that was that we should kind of not forget that as we try and readapt again, that it has been a significant upheaval in our lives. So yeah, it was fascinating to talk to them, and they provided some really good insights.
That's so interesting. Thanks, Rach. I find it so interesting that they said that this time was comparable, and yeah, that's good to know. If anyone has any questions for Rachel and about the article, please do put your questions in the Q&A chat box, and I'll also link the article in the chat too, so you can have a proper read of it. It's a great piece. Thanks, Rach. Next up, we'll be speaking with Matu Bush and some of our special guests, Kim Kwan and Bronwyn Gresham, about mental health and resilience and the launch of the community-driven project, Letter to My Pre-COVID Self. Over to you, Matu.
Great, thank you so much, Vanessa. Great to be launching this today. Now, really just following on from Rachel, there was a real sense of perspective taking, and sometimes distance is hard to get a sense of. And what I found during lockdown was that I was losing track of time. And when I speak to my colleagues, they didn't know whether it was Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday. And when I looked at the neuroscience behind that, I realized there was a phenomena taking place that during stress and anxiety, our memories start to capture a lot more information, which causes an elongation of time. Plus, we were living in 24-hour news cycles that were incredibly intense. So what I did in order to get perspective, I started a project called Letter to My Pre-COVID Self, which is based on a lot of bibliotherapy and looking back at a time in your life and writing to a letter to your past self. Now, it's a way to get perspective back to the now by placing people firmly in a point of time and asking them to catalogue the substantial levels of change that they experience. This type of letter writing is not new. It's only been less than 3 months, but so much has changed. I've changed, and I know you all have as well. So we asked members of our local community to answer the following questions. What have they missed being able to do, and what good thing have they discovered during themselves during the lockdown? But we also asked them, what advice would they give to their pre-COVID self? What we did was then match that with a photographer who will a whole lot of photos of people just in their natural habitats, exploring what life in lockdown was like for them and their. Rachel, for example, she adopted a greyhound and really enjoyed spending more time relaxing and slowing down. There was a lot of experiences where people found that they actually welcomed the time to slow down, contemplate, think differently about life in lockdown. Sorry, I'll just get out of that sharing now. So I'm delighted to welcome to the Health Transformation Lab Kim Kwan. Now, Kim wrote a very elegant letter to her pre-COVID self, and I'd love for her to share that. Kim is a research scientist at Metabolomics Australia at Melbourne University, and we first heard Kim's letter to her pre-COVID self at a queer event recently during Pride Week, and I was really keen for Kim to share how eloquently she reframed life in lockdown. Over to you, Kim.
Thanks, Matthew. Happy to be here. So I would like to preface my letter by saying that I am writing from a position of privilege, which greatly shapes my perception of the recent few months, and that is evidenced by the fact that I am even able to be part of this program today. So, dear past Kim, hindsight is a gift, and in this case, living in Australia means you know what's coming before it actually hits. The world is going to collectively experience a heightened sense of anxiety and change. You know people don't like change, especially so suddenly in many aspects of life. So this is going to be hard on everyone. Everyone handles stress differently and may react differently. A lot of behaviour will be a reaction to fear. Make space for it, remembering that everyone is doing the best in these new circumstances. Clear communication is as important as ever, but remember, people will find it harder to communicate when stressed. You're going to have a lot of practice in handling the uncertainty yourself. Be kind to yourself. Productivity is not as important as staying well. Focus on what is within your control and let go of what you can't. This is actually a good time to slow down, take stock, and reflect. As awful as the situation and cause is, you really need a break. There will be good things. You're going to save on 2.5 hours of transit time a day. You're going to save so much money on food, which you should probably keep doing post-COVID. You start running in the mornings and discover all the coffee places within a 2.5 kilometre of your house. And in a surprising twist, it's going to give you a circadian rhythm for the first time in years. The good of humanity reveals itself too. Fred Rogers said, "Look for the helpers. You'll always find people who are helping." And this is no different. Scientists around the world will share resources and work together to fight COVID. Healthcare workers will continue to show up. The vulnerable will be supported by neighbours, family, friends, and strangers. People will focus on maintaining connection and offering support, on collaboration rather than competition. Humanity continues, and knowing this will help to handle the constant and overwhelming news. Of course, this is easy to say when you're going to be one of the lucky ones. You still have a job, a safe place to live. There are many who are disadvantaged and less privileged. The vulnerabilities that queer people, people of colour, and disabled people face may be exacerbated and magnified during this time. The events in the US just in the last week demonstrate that these issues don't stop in the face of a pandemic. Firstly, remember that you have to take care of yourself to take care of others. Remember that there is no right way of getting through this. In the inevitable rough days, let yourself feel whatever you feel, knowing it will pass. Then, when you can, look for the opportunities to help, contribute, think, and learn that this situation creates. When you can, realize that your ability to disconnect from unhelpful media can make space and time for helpful connections. Realize that there are other ways to connect with the world, actions you can take to help right now. And I think those are the two things that it boils down to. Connection and action at whatever level you can manage, whether it's taking morning walks to help cope with day-to-day life, to messaging a friend when something reminds you of them, or supporting community organizations and the disadvantaged. Connection and action, one thing at a time, one day at a time. Love, Kim.
Brilliant, Kim. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I think it gives everyone an idea to reflect back, even though it's only been a few months, and to get perspective on the enormity of change. Ultimately, it's a letter of hope. I'd love to invite Bronwyn Gresham, who's the clinical psychologist here at RMIT. She's our senior advisor on all things wellbeing and human flourishing. And she started with her team a fantastic initiative called RMIT Together. And this is a Facebook group, which I'll just share with you now. And essentially, it is bringing a whole lot of messaging to students and those affected by the shutdown. And that's certainly been some stories we've heard about students that really relied on the university as a safe place and where that's not, and no longer available to them. And Bronwyn, I'd love to ask you about Stay Connected, and yeah, they've got some unhelpful media there. That's cool. There we go. Close all tabs, sorry. And so, Bronwyn, I'd love to introduce you. Help us understand what staying connected through COVID-19 means for you, but also for your RMIT student population.
Oh, thank you. Right.
Sure can.
Bronwyn, now you've muted yourself, I think.
Oh, unmute again. How's that?
We can hear you now.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I was just complimenting Kim on the beautiful letter written to yourself, and it really is, you know, the heart and soul of some of the elements that in dreaming up this RMIT Together campaign we were really hoping to generate, particularly you know, around the hope and the essence of coming together and activating supports and being kind to oneself, etc. So, I mean, I feel like in the beginning, similar to probably many of you, we were really very conscious of the challenges, particularly the mental health and wellbeing challenges that this period of time was going to generate. And certainly that was then confirmed with the National Mental Health and Wellbeing Pandemic Response, the Mental Health Commission report that came out that really has signalled the increased psychological distress that our community is experiencing for so many different and varied reasons. And so as a team, we're really also conscious that we're in a really large organisation. So RMIT is like a mini city, and there is so much incredible things going on and so many people who really care so very deeply about their students, about their colleagues, who are already doing so many wonderful things around wellbeing. So part of our thinking was how could we begin to bring some of these pieces of work together to really create visibility of all the wonderful altruistic work going on, and to amplify all the various different campaigns that were happening. And that was the RMIT Together campaign. So thank you, Matu, for showing the Facebook group component of it. And it was really like a humongous effort with lots of different, so it's not just our team. There are many, many stakeholders involved, from our communications to RUSU to student life to counselling service, all of us kind of trying to come together to think through what could we do for students during this time. And one of the, and to really parallel that with also the staff experience of wellbeing. So we have this parallel process between Facebook and the staff Yammer group, which it's like a social platform for staff as well. And I guess one of the key features of this was thinking about what Nico was saying around the individual and the collective, and dissolving this kind of dichotomy between separation of self and others, beginning to dissolve that, and in recognition that when we do take care of ourselves, we are more inclined to take care of community. And when community is taken care of, when there's health in the community, then we are well too. And same with mirroring in our natural ecosystem. So really beginning to play with that idea of breaking down those, you know, that invisible dichotomy, and introducing a model called the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which I can speak more to, but really weaving this particular framework within everything that we're doing to really encourage people to engage in activities that are really evidence-based around self-care, but that really amplify population wellbeing and lift that up at the same time.
Fantastic, Bronwyn. What are some of the emerging issues you've seen from the student group, but also from the broader community? As you as a psychologist working through, we have a saying in the lab that few are infected with COVID, but everyone is affected by COVID.
Absolutely.
What's it like for you from a clinical psych perspective?
Yeah, well, certainly within my contacts within the counselling service, I think, you know, the financial stress and strain is a significantly huge factor impacting many students. There's been a huge influx for the financial grant scheme that RMIT had, and recognising that, you know, in addition to that, many students lost casual employment, lost housing security, lost kind of certainty around what they were going to be doing in semester 1 and 2. So that the stress of, you know, some students just living kind of moment to moment, day by day. And this is where, you know, partnerships with RUSU are really beneficial, and all of the community services being uplifted so that people actually know that there are community supports out there, that if you don't have any food, you can go and get a free, or you can go and get housing support advice, or, you know, just even knowing that there's that in the community is important. And you know, how do students get access to that information is also, you know, really one of the thinking behind having a sole kind of RMIT Together Facebook group.
Right.
But certainly financial burden and, you know, the stress, like people, we just, like staff and students, we just want to do well in life. We want to succeed. We don't want to fail. And so that fear around not being as productive, which of course many people aren't as productive during these times for very understandable reasons. But this, just that added stress and pressure that places on that part of our brain that really is driven by that sense of satisfaction and reward. When that's kind of messed around with, it can really lead to that loss of purpose and lack of motivation, lack of drive, and that can really create a lot of psychological distress. It's really disturbing when we go through that.
Things like Letter to My Pre-COVID Self, which asks you to reflect and give you a sense of perspective, and in a sense, like much of what Vishal said in his article, a sense of choice, and that choice leads to agency, and that agency leads to more exercise of agency, which can take away some of the fear and also the disorientation. So we're live now with Letter to My Pre-COVID Self. So if you search lettertomyprecovidself.com.au, you're able to log your own letter and answer the 3 questions that were developed by a psychologist, and we'll post those. And if you're keen for an isolation portrait, which is another phenomena which captures people in life in lockdown, reach out to the contact details on the website and we'll send around one of our volunteer photographers. That's all from me, and back over to you, Venetia, unless Bronwyn, you had looked like you were about to say something.
I just really wanted to validate and reinforce one of the reasons why Letter to My Pre-COVID Self is so brilliant, if that's okay. Which is, you know, when we go through adverse experiences, one of the things we really want to encourage is not just resilience, where we kind of bounce back to our normal selves, but this concept of resilient growth. And one of the ways that we know that we can grow through adverse times is through self-reflection and finding some sense of meaning or purpose or appreciation from what we've learned through that experience. And that's why I love the Letter to My Pre-COVID Self, because it really invites that capacity to reflect and try to search for those. It might even be like a tiny little nugget of experience, of pocket of gold, but to amplify that and really hold on to that as something that will to lead to a growth in character or a growth in learning.
Wonderful. Really appreciate your time. And thank you so much, Kim, for being so honest and sharing your letter as well. Now I'm handing over back to Vishal, the director of the lab, to round up. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Matu, and thank you so much, Bronwyn and Kim. A fantastic segment of kind of honesty and insight. One of the things that we've really been reflecting on in the lab, and I think that it's not just in the lab, but I think this kind of lockdown situation has really highlighted to us some of the fissures and the cracks and the crevices within our existing paradigms, our existing ways of doing things. We've seen, you can look at it from a technology point of view, where we have perhaps had it forced upon ourselves that some of the promise of digital technology needs a little bit of humanization before it could work to genuinely connect us, to genuinely help us to work and learn in really interesting ways. I think we've also learned that in terms of some of our thinking and some of the thinking that's out there at the moment about loneliness. and mental health. And there's a beautiful comment that I see in the Q&A section. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, from Tark McDonald, basically noting that many of the things that we're talking about now, many of the kinds of the challenges that we are talking about now apply equally to other forms of mental health and well-being, including dementia and anxiety. And I think so we've seen that which used to be for other people, things like loneliness, things like certain kinds of mental health. We have just basically seen through this lockdown period that this is something, it's shone a light on the fact that this is a generalized thing. Everyday, regular, mainstream people have now started to understand that loneliness isn't something that happens to somebody else. That dissatisfaction and anxiety aren't things that happen at the margin. They're actually a part in interesting ways of everybody's life and in everybody's day. And as Bronwyn was saying, and as Rachel was saying, and also as Kim beautifully was saying as well, there really is something that I think emerges from some of the work that Nico's been doing and some of the thinking that we've been doing, which is, in a sense, if we are to learn anything from this pandemic, let it be the lesson of inclusion. Let it be the erasing of various different kinds of barriers between self and other, between individual and collective, between mental health and mental illness, between society and the individual, between health and other aspects of our life and our system. I think actually the challenge of COVID-19 and what we've learned through COVID-19 is that some of these barriers are far more permeable than we imagined, and we can take a far more inclusive approach to many of these things to help us step more bravely into a future world. And I think the other thing, and this is something that Nico mentioned really nicely and comes out from some of the stories that Rachel was telling us as well, that essentially one of the things that, look, for so long we have been laboring under the conception that there's only really one way to organize society and organize communal life and organize productive life and organize education. And actually what this lockdown period has shown us is that we can make choices about that, and those choices, those social choices and those individual choices, can radically change contexts and communities and worlds and relations really quickly. And so I think, amongst other things, as Matu mentioned, I think recognizing our social agency, recognizing that we can individually and collectively make choices about how we want to live, and how we want to live better, and how we want to live with others in more healthy, in more productive, in more compassionate, and in more flourishing ways. Let that be the lesson. Let that be what we learn, and let us find ways to take that forward. Particularly as we now come to the end of Reconciliation Week, and as we watch the abject horror of what's going on in the United States, as we think about the history of division, exclusion, and brutality, even in our own systems and in our own cultures, I think that we in the lab think that would be a beautiful meditation for us all, and a beautiful thing for us to reflect upon, as Bronwyn says. So thank you all so much for your time, for our fantastic speakers and panelists, Charlotte, Nico, Venetia, Rachel, Kim, Bronwyn, and of course Matu. Thank you so much for joining us. For all of those out there in the digital domain, it's been lovely to be with you in this disembodied and networked way. I'm feeling very kind of supernatural at the moment. We're looking forward to having more open labs online, and at this stage we'll be having another one in the first week of next month. So I think the rule is the first Tuesday of the month. So we'll look forward to talking more then, sharing some more ideas, and in the meantime, we're hoping that you're staying very happy, very safe, and that you're finding ways to reflect and flourish in this time of tribulation, change, but also great opportunity. Thank you all very much. We look forward to seeing you again soon.